In the dimly lit corners of Montana's rugged countryside, where forgotten truck stops merge with remnants of the wild frontier, a tale unfolds that serves as a stark reminder. Those who seem the easiest to prey upon often harbor the most dangerous secrets. Today, we witness how a group of hardened outlaws made the fatal mistake of targeting Emma Chen, a quiet waitress whose trembling hands and soft voice masked a legacy of iron will and calculated cunning. They would soon discover that, behind her timid smile, lay the unmistakable bearing of one of the most notorious saloon empires the Northwest had ever known. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's tale will leave you breathless. The neon sign of the Midnight Pine Lodge cast a pale blue glow across the rain-slicked parking lot as Emma Chen methodically wiped down tables in the empty dining room. Her small frame, dressed in a weathered uniform and sensible shoes, gave no indication of the weight she carried in her heart or the legacy flowing through her veins. The clock ticked past midnight, marking another quiet shift at the remote roadside establishment where truckers and travelers sought refuge from the unforgiving Montana highways. "Emma, honey," called Martha from behind the counter, her voice carrying the weariness of the graveyard shift. "You can head home if you want. It's dead tonight." Emma offered a gentle smile, tucking a strand of jet-black hair behind her ear. As she continued her cleaning routine, the other waitresses often questioned why the owner's daughter worked the worst shifts like any other employee. But Emma knew the importance of understanding every aspect of the business from the ground. Up the Midnight Pine wasn't just another truck stop. To those who knew its history, it was the crowning jewel of James Chen's hospitality empire, a network of establishments that had transformed from humble beginnings into a legitimate business powerhouse. But 20 years ago, before Emma was born, these places had served a different purpose, welcoming a different clientele, one that her father had worked tirelessly to leave behind. The bell above the door chimed, drawing Emma's attention. 3 men entered, their leather jackets bearing the unmistakable patch of the Steel Wolves, a notorious motorcycle gang that had been making waves across state lines. Their boots tracked mud across her freshly mopped floor as they claimed a booth in the corner, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the quiet diner. "Well, well," the largest of the 3 called out, his voice carrying the gravelly undertone of too many cigarettes. "Looks like we've found ourselves a little lotus flower." Emma kept her eyes down, continuing her work as she had been taught. "Always observe," her father's voice echoed in her memory, "but never let them see you watching." Martha moved to take their order, but the leader waved her off. "Nah, we want the little one," he insisted, pointing at Emma. "Ain't that right, boys?" His companions chuckled, the sound carrying no warmth. Emma approached their table, order pad in hand, her movements deliberately small, unthreatening. She had learned long ago that people saw what they expected to see. In her case, a timid Asian girl working the graveyard shift at a remote truck stop. They didn't see the security cameras her father had installed at precisely calculated angles, or the panic button subtly integrated into her uniform's pocket. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The men exchanged amused glances, clearly enjoying what they perceived as fear. The leader, a man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, leaned forward. "Heard some interesting things about this place," he drawled, ignoring her question. "About its owner, James Chen. You wouldn't happen to know him, would you, sweetheart?" Emma's hand remained steady as she held her order pad, years of practice controlling her reactions. "I just work here," she replied softly, the lie coming easily after countless repetitions. Her father had insisted on this arrangement, wanting her to learn the business from every angle while maintaining anonymity. "The kitchen closes in 20 minutes. The man with the snake tattoo reached out, his fingers brushing her wrist. Emma allowed the contact, noting the crude skull ring on his finger, mentally cataloguing every detail, just as she had been trained. "Now that's not very hospitable," he said, his grip tightening slightly. "Way I hear it, the Chen family has quite a history of hospitality in these parts." Through the diner's windows, Emma caught sight of 2 more motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. The Steel Wolves were known for their efficiency in taking over local businesses, using a combination of intimidation and violence to establish their presence. They had been moving methodically through the region, and now they had reached the Midnight Pine. Emma gently pulled her hand away, maintaining her timid demeanor. "I'll give you a few minutes with the menu," she said, retreating to the counter where Martha watched with concern. The older waitress reached for the phone, but Emma shook her head slightly. Everything was unfolding exactly as expected. Her father had always said that the most dangerous moment wasn't when threats were made, but in the quiet moments before, when predators grew too confident, too certain of their advantage. Emma touched the jade pendant hanging beneath her uniform, a gift from her father on her 18th birthday. Inside was a key to a room beneath the diner, one that contained everything she might need if this night went the way she suspected it would. The bell chimed again as 2 more gang members entered, their boots heavy on the linoleum floor. Through the kitchen window, Emma could see Cook reaching beneath the counter, but she caught his eye and shook her head. Not yet. The night was still young, and these men had yet to learn what her father had taught her through years of careful instruction, that true power lay not in brute force, but in knowing exactly when and how to use it. The Steel Wolves spread out through the diner with practiced efficiency, claiming strategic positions that Emma recognized from countless security briefings. 2 positioned themselves near the entrance, 1 lounged at the counter within reach of the register, and the leader with his snake tattoo maintained his position in the corner booth, watching her with predatory amusement. Through the kitchen window, Emma caught fragments of conversation between the newcomers and Cook, his weathered face maintaining perfect ignorance as they made pointed comments about protection fees and insurance. Emma moved methodically between tables, refreshing coffee cups, noting weapons poorly concealed beneath leather jackets. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Watch their hands, their eyes, the way they position themselves. Everything is information. A subtle vibration from her phone caught her attention, a message from the Midnight Pine security system. Motion sensors had detected more vehicles approaching from the highway. Right on schedule, the Steel Wolves never traveled. Light, especially when making their first move into new territory. "Hey, China doll!" the snake-tattooed leader called out, his voice carrying that particular tone that made Martha's hands clench around her coffee pot. "Why don't you come here and tell us more about how you just work here?" Emma approached their table, maintaining the slight tremor in her hands that she had practiced since childhood. It was amazing how much people revealed when they thought you were afraid of them. The leader's companions had spread out now, one at the counter, one by the restrooms, creating a loose circle around her. "I heard stories about this place," the leader continued, reaching out to toy with her order pad, "about how old man Chen built himself quite an operation. Started with 1 truck stop, now owns what, 2 dozen? 3? That's quite a climb for someone who came here with nothing." Emma kept her eyes downcast, but her mind was racing, calculating angles, distances, analyzing their positions, just as she had been trained. Through the windows, she counted 3 more motorcycles pulling into the lot. The Steel Wolves were notorious for their timing, always arriving near closing, when businesses were most vulnerable. "Must be nice," one of the other men chimed in, "having a place like this just waiting to be improved." His leather jacket bore sergeant's stripes, marking him as part of the gang's hierarchy. The way he carried himself suggested military Background, probably dishonorable discharge based on his age and attitude. Emma's phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. "We're in position. Green light." She deleted it without responding. Not yet. Her father had taught her the importance of timing, of letting situations develop until the perfect moment presented itself. The bell chimed as more gang members entered, bringing the total to 8. Emma could feel Martha's growing anxiety, see Cook's tension through the kitchen window. But this was all part of the dance, steps choreographed long before the Steel Wolves had ever set their sights on the Midnight Pine. "You know what I think?" The leader stood, towering over Emma's small frame. "I think you know exactly who James Chen is. In fact," his hand reached out, fingers brushing her name tag, "I think you might be able to help us send him a message." Emma allowed herself to flinch at his touch, noting how it made him smile, how it fed his sense of power. These men were professionals at intimidation, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had chosen the Midnight Pine as their first target, assuming its remote location and seemingly vulnerable staff made it an easy mark. Through the windows, Emma watched as more bikes arrived, their headlights cutting through the Montana night. The parking lot was filling up now, just as it had 20 years ago when a different gang had tried to muscle in on her father's territory. That night had ended with sirens and cordoned-off crime scenes. Tonight, well, tonight would be different. "Really do just work here," Emma repeated softly, her voice carrying just the right amount of fear. "The register doesn't hold much cash. We deposit everything at the end of each shift." The leader's laugh was ugly, echoed by his companions. "Oh, sweetheart, we're not here for the pocket change in your register. We're here to have a conversation about ownership, about the future of this fine establishment." Emma's hand brushed against her jade pendant, feeling the key hidden within. Below the diner, behind reinforced walls and security doors, lay everything she might need. Evidence gathered over months of surveillance, documentation of the Steel Wolves' operations across 3 states, and something even more valuable, proof of their connection to a string of disappearances along the trucking routes. "Maybe," the leader continued, his finger tracing the edge of her name tag, "you could help us get in touch with Mr. Chen. Let him know we're interested in discussing a business partnership." Emma allowed her shoulders to hunch, making herself appear smaller, more frightened. I close up in 20 minutes, she managed, her voice trembling perfectly. I could leave a message with the morning manager." The leader's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, I think we'll stick around. Keep you company while you close up. Maybe have a nice long chat about the future of this place." He glanced at his companions. "Boys, why don't you make sure no one interrupts our quality time with the lady?" 2 of the gang members moved to flip the open sign to closed, while others began pulling down the window blinds. They were settling in, making themselves at home, completely unaware that every move they made was being recorded, every word captured by hidden microphones that had been documenting their activities since they first appeared on the Midnight Pine's radar 3 months ago. Emma touched her pendant again, thinking of the room below, of her father's lessons about patience and timing. The night was still young, and these men had yet to learn what happened to those who threatened the Chen family's legacy. Sometimes, she reflected, the most dangerous predator was the one that waited longest to show its teeth. The kitchen door swung open as Cook emerged, wiping his hands on a stained apron. His weathered face showed nothing but mild concern as he surveyed the scene. "Everything all right out here, Emma?" he asked, his voice carrying decades of experience in knowing when not to see too much. Emma glanced at Martha, who stood frozen behind the counter, then back to Cook. We're closing early tonight," she managed, her voice small. The leader with the snake tattoo smirked, clearly enjoying what he perceived as mounting fear in the diner's staff. "Head on home, Bill," Martha called to Cook, her voice wavering slightly. I'll handle the cleanup." But the old cook stood his ground, his presence a reminder of darker days when the midnight pine had served a different purpose. He had worked for her father long before Emma was born, back when James Chen was building his empire, one careful step at a time. A memory surfaced, sharp as broken glass. Her father, in the study of their home, teaching her about the importance of observation. "People show you who they are," he'd said, cleaning his glasses with methodical precision, "not through their words, but through the small things, how they treat those they think are beneath them, how they move when they think." No one's watching. The gang member by the counter was getting fidgety, his hand straying too often to the bulge beneath his jacket. Military training, Emma noted, but sloppy now, undisciplined. Through the kitchen window she caught a glimpse of movement, shadows passing in the back alley, exactly where they shouldn't be if the steel wolves were as professional as their reputation suggested. Her phone buzzed again. "Surveillance confirms 12 more en route. Response team standing by." Emma deleted the message, maintaining her facade of nervous energy as she refilled coffee cups with trembling hands. The leader's eyes followed her every move, his satisfaction growing with each sign of perceived weakness. "You." "No," he drawled, gesturing for his men to take up positions around the diner. "I've been doing some research on your boss. Interesting story, really. Came here with nothing, built himself quite an operation. But there are gaps in that story, aren't there? Years where James Chen just disappeared." Emma's hand tightened imperceptibly around the coffee pot. Those years, the ones her father never discussed when he had gone away to learn the business, were not common knowledge. The steel wolves had done their homework, but they had missed the most crucial detail: why he had returned. "I wouldn't know about that," she whispered, forcing her voice to crack slightly. "Like I said, I just work here. Yeah, we got that part." The leader stood, his height allowing him to loom over her. "But see, here's what's interesting. All these places Chen owns, they're spotless. No protection agreements, no arrangements with local crews, nothing. It's like someone's been preparing for something." Through the windows, Emma counted more bikes arriving. The parking lot was filling up now, headlights cutting through the rain in practiced patterns. They were establishing a perimeter, just as her father had predicted they would. The steel wolves were nothing if not methodical in their takeovers. "Please." Martha spoke up from behind the counter, her voice carrying genuine fear now. "We don't want any trouble. If you want to leave." "A message for Mr. Chen?" "Oh, we'll leave a message, all right." The leader's smile turned cruel as he reached out to grab Emma's wrist, his grip tight enough to make her gasp. "Starting with this pretty little thing here." Cook took a step forward, but Emma caught his eye, a subtle shake of her head stopping. "Him? Not yet. Everything had to play out exactly as planned. Her father had taught her that timing was everything, in business, in survival, in revenge." "You're hurting me," she whimpered, allowing tears to well up in her eyes. The leader's grip loosened slightly, but his smile widened. They always enjoyed the fear, these types. It made them careless. "Tell me something, sweetheart." He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "Does the name Golden Dragon mean anything to you? Because that's what they used to call your boss back in the day, before he went legitimate. Before he started pretending to be just another businessman." Emma's breath caught, not entirely an act. The Golden Dragon was a name she had only heard whispered, a legend from her father's past that even he rarely acknowledged. But these men, throwing it around so casually, meant something had changed. Someone had talked. Through the kitchen window, she saw Cook's hand move beneath the counter, reaching for what she knew was there. But Emma gave another subtle shake of her head. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The best weapon is when your enemy doesn't know you have. The best defense is letting them think they've won." The leader released her wrist, shoving her slightly as he turned to address his men. "Search the place. Every office, every storage room, the old man's. Got to have a safe somewhere. And make sure our little friends outside know not to let anyone in or out. Emma stumbled back, rubbing her wrist as she watched them spread out through the diner. In her mind, she mapped their movements against the building's layout, against the security systems and hidden passages that her father had installed years ago. They thought they were in control. Thought they had trapped 3 helpless employees in a remote diner. They had no idea they were playing right into a plan that had been set in motion the moment they first started asking questions about James Chen 3 months ago. No idea that every move they made was being recorded, every word documented, building a case that would either end with their surrender or their destruction. Emma touched her pendant again, feeling the key within. Soon she would show these men why her father had really disappeared all those years ago, not to learn the business, but to teach his daughter everything she would need to know about protecting it. The distant rumble of thunder rolled across the Montana sky as Emma retreated. Behind the counter, her movements deliberately unsteady. Through the rain-streaked windows, she watched as more steel wolves secured the perimeter, their motorcycles forming a barrier across the parking lot exits. Inside, the search for the imaginary safe continued, punctuated by the sound of slamming doors and overturned furniture. "Nothing in the office," one of the gang members reported, emerging from the back hallway. "But there's a locked door in the storage area. Looks newer than the rest." The leader's eyes gleamed with interest. Well, looks like Mr. Chen's got himself a secret or two." He turned to Emma, who had busied herself organizing sugar packets with trembling fingers. "Where's the key, sweetheart?" I don't know." "About any locked door," Emma stammered, her voice quavering. "The morning manager handles all that." She glanced at Martha, who stood frozen by the coffee maker, then at Cook, who watched the scene with carefully manufactured helplessness. A new message flashed across her phone. "Local law enforcement has been neutralized. Steel Wolves have 2 officers on payroll. Proceed as planned." Emma deleted it, her mind racing through contingencies. Of course they had corrupted the local police. It explained their boldness, their confidence in operating so openly. The leader, she had heard one of his men call him Viper, approached the counter, his movements carrying the lazy confidence of someone used to being feared. "You know what I think." He reached across, grabbing her chin roughly. "I think you know exactly what's behind that door, and I think it's time you started being more helpful." Through the kitchen window, Emma caught sight of movement in the back alley. More bikes arriving, but these were different. Streamlined machines built for speed rather than show, their riders wearing tactical gear instead of leather cuts. The Steel Wolves' professional backup had arrived, just as intelligence had suggested they would. "Check the cameras," Viper ordered one of his men. "Make sure we don't have any unexpected visitors." "Cameras are on a loop," came the reply, showing empty parking lot, same as the last hour. Emma allowed herself a small smile, quickly hidden. They had accessed the decoy system, the obvious security cameras with their outdated equipment. The real surveillance network installed by her father years ago continued recording every moment, every word. Her phone vibrated again. "Response team in position, awaiting your signal." But Emma knew it wasn't time yet. These men had come prepared for resistance, prepared for a fight. What they weren't prepared for was patience. "Last chance." Viper's voice carried an edge of steel now as he addressed the diner's staff. "Someone gives me the key to that door, or things get really unpleasant." His hand moved to his jacket, where the outline of a shoulder holster was visible. "Wait." Martha's voice cracked with fear. "Please, I think I know where the spare keys are kept. In the office. There's a drawer." "Martha, no!" Emma protested, her voice small, but carrying just enough authority to make Viper's eyes narrow. It was a calculated risk, a glimpse of steel beneath the silk, but one that paid off as his attention focused more fully on her. Well, He smiled, cold and predatory. Maybe our little lotus flower does know something after all. He gestured to two of his men. Take the old lady to the office, find these keys. The rest of you, keep searching. There's got to be more than one security system in a place like this. Through the windows, Emma watched as the tactical team finished, positioning themselves around the building. They were good, professional-grade operators, not common thugs. The Steel Wolves were spending serious resources on this takeover, which meant they knew more about the Midnight Pine's importance than they should. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. When they show you their full hand too early, it means they're either desperate or being pushed by someone else. The question was, who had put the Steel Wolves up to this? Who had told them about the Golden Dragon? Viper's hand moved to her throat, fingers tracing the chain of her necklace until they found the jade pendant. Pretty piece, he mused. Family. Heirloom? His grip tightened slightly, not enough to choke, but enough to remind her of her vulnerability. Emma let real tears fill her eyes, though not for the reasons he assumed. The pendant had been her mother's, given to her father as a promise, long before Emma was born. Before the Golden Dragon, before the Empire, when James Chen was just another immigrant trying to make his way in a harsh land. Please, she whispered, letting her voice crack. It's all I have of her. Something flickered in Viper's eyes, satisfaction mixed with a hint of genuine curiosity. Your mother? Now that's interesting, because according to our research, James Chen's wife disappeared around the same time he did, all those years ago, right around the time the Golden Dragon stopped being just a local legend. Emma's hand moved to her pocket, fingers brushing against the panic button she hadn't yet pressed. In the kitchen, Cook watched with growing tension, his hand straying toward the counter where she knew a shotgun waited. But Emma gave another subtle shake of her head. The Steel Wolves were revealing more with every word, every action. Her father had taught her the value of information, how it could be more powerful than any weapon. The sound of breaking glass came from the office, followed by Martha's frightened cry. Nothing but employee files, one of the men reported. No keys. Viper's grip on the pendant tightened. Time's running out, sweetheart, and I'm starting to think you know a lot more than you're letting on. He had no idea how right he was. Maybe, Viper said, releasing the pendant but maintaining his proximity. We should have a private conversation about your family history. He gestured to one of his men. Take her to the office. Sometimes people are more forthcoming in intimate settings. Emma felt Martha's panic from across the room, saw Cook's muscles tense as he prepared to reach for the hidden shotgun. But this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when their confidence would lead them to make their first real mistake. Wait! Emma's voice trembled perfectly as she raised her hands. The key, it's not in the office. Her fingers moved to the jade pendant, watching understanding dawn in Viper's eyes. Smart girl, he smiled, reaching for the necklace. Hiding it in plain sight. Your boss is clever, I'll give him that. His fingers closed around the pendant, but before he could pull it free, a new voice cut through the tension. Sir! One of the tactical team members appeared in the doorway, his bearing distinctly military. We've got movement on the thermal scanners. Something underneath us. Viper's hand froze on the pendant. Underneath? Emma allowed herself a small smile, quickly hidden. They had finally noticed what had been there all along. Her father's voice whispered in her memory, let them think they're in control until the moment they realize they never were. The whole building's got a sub-level, the tactical operator continued, consulting a tablet. Professional setup, multiple rooms, reinforced walls. It's not on any of the building plans. Viper's grip tightened on the pendant, his earlier amusement replaced by something harder. Well, well, looks like Mr. Chen's got himself quite the secret basement, and I bet this little key opens more than just a storage room, doesn't it? Through the windows, Emma watched as more tactical team members deployed equipment: thermal, imaging, signal detectors, professional-grade surveillance gear. They were well-funded, well-equipped, and completely unprepared for what awaited them. "Please," Emma whispered, letting real fear color her voice. Not for herself, but for what was about to unfold. "My father. He'll pay whatever you want. Just let us go." The silence that followed her slip was deafening. Viper's eyes narrowed, his grip on the pendant becoming painful. "Your father?" A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Now, that's interesting, because I could have sworn you said you just worked here," Martha gasped from across the room, realizing Emma's apparent mistake. Cook's hand moved closer to the counter, but Emma gave him another subtle shake of her head. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," Viper announced to his crew, "it seems we've hit the jackpot. Not just Chen's secret. Yvonne, but his precious daughter too." He yanked the pendant free, breaking the chain. "This night just keeps getting better." Emma's hand moved to her throat, genuine tears welling up. Not from fear or pain, but from the loss of her mother's pendant. These men had just crossed a line they didn't even know existed. "Get the thermal imaging team in here," Viper ordered. "I want to know exactly what's down there before we open that door. And someone get me Chen's number. Time to have a chat about his daughter's future." Emma watched as they deployed their equipment, as they mapped the sub-level with their expensive gear. They were thorough, professional, documenting every detail of the underground structure. Her father had taught her to appreciate irony. They were doing half her work for her, creating a record of their own investigation. "Sir?" Another tactical operator approached, his voice low. "The sub-level, it's not just storage. We're seeing what looks like a command center, armory, panic room. This place is a fortress." Viper's laugh was cold as he examined the key hidden within the jade pendant. "Of course it is. The golden dragon wouldn't leave his nest unprotected." He turned to Emma, whose tears had dried, replaced by something else, something that made him pause for just a moment. "Your father built himself quite the operation here. Hidden rooms, secret vaults. Tell me, little girl, did he teach you all his tricks?" Emma thought of the real key, tucked safely in her uniform pocket, of the rooms these men couldn't see, the systems their equipment couldn't detect, of all the lessons her father had taught her about patience, about letting enemies reveal themselves completely before showing your hand. "No," she whispered, her voice carrying just enough tremor to feed their confidence. He tried to keep me away from all that. Said it wasn't safe." "Smart man," Viper mused, gesturing for his men to take position around what they thought was the only entrance to the sub-level, trying to keep his little girl pure, clean of all his sins. "But tonight," he smiled, cold and cruel, "tonight you're going to help us take everything he built. And then maybe, if you're very cooperative, we'll let you say goodbye before we send him a message he'll never forget." Emma watched as they prepared their breach, as they readied their weapons and checked their tactical gear. These men thought they were hunters, thought they had cornered their prey. They had no idea they were playing their part in a script written long before they'd ever heard of the Midnight Pine. Her phone buzzed one final time. "All assets in position. Green light?" Emma deleted the message, thinking of her mother's pendant, now broken in Viper's hands. These men had come looking for the golden dragon's legacy. It was time to show them exactly what that meant. "Boss," one of the tactical operators called from near the hidden door, "Locke's got a biometric scanner underneath. Key's not enough. Needs a fingerprint." Viper's expression darkened as he turned back to Emma, who had been quietly observing their frustrated attempts to breach the sub-level. "Looks like you're going to be useful after all, sweetheart." He grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the door. "Time to see what Daddy's been hiding down there." Emma allowed herself to be pulled along, stumbling slightly to maintain her frightened facade. Through the windows, she could see the tactical team had established a complete perimeter. their professional gear a stark contrast to the steel wolves' leather cuts. In the kitchen, Cook watched with carefully constructed helplessness while Martha wrung her hands behind the counter. "Please," Emma whimpered as Viper positioned her hand over the scanner. "My father, he'll be so angry." "That's the idea, Princess." Viper's grip tightened painfully. "Daddy's going to learn what happens when you don't play nice with the steel wolves." He forced her finger onto the scanner, but instead of the expected beep of acceptance, a red light flashed. "Access denied," a computerized voice announced. "Security protocol initiated." Emma felt Viper's frustration in the way his fingers dug into her arm. "What game are you playing?" he snarled, all pretense of charm gone. "Open it!" I can't," Emma's voice cracked. "Father only gave me emergency access. It won't work if I'm under duress." The lie came easily, another piece of misdirection. In a night full of them, the real access panel was hidden elsewhere, but letting them focus on this decoy served her purposes. Through her peripheral vision, Emma caught movement in the kitchen, Cook slowly reaching for something beneath the counter. She gave him an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not yet. These men had to commit fully to their chosen path before she could show them their mistake. "Sir," another tactical operator approached, his tablet displaying thermal readings. "We're picking up power fluctuations. Whatever's down there, it's drawing serious energy." Viper yanked Emma closer, his eyes searching her face for deception. "What's happening down there? What did you activate?" Emma thought of the systems humming to life beneath their feet, of protocols her father had designed years ago for exactly this scenario. "Security measures," she whispered, letting real fear color her voice. Not for herself, but for what was about to unfold. "Father said the vault protects itself." "Get the breach charges," Viper ordered, shoving Emma toward one of his men. "If we can't finesse our way in, we'll do this the hard way." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "Time to call Daddy and let him know his little girl's about to give us a tour of his secret clubhouse." Emma watched as they prepared. The explosives, their movements precise and practiced. These weren't common thugs. They had military training, professional equipment, which meant they also had professional backing. The question wasn't who had sent them, but why now. "Sir?" the tech specialist called out, his voice carrying an edge of concern. "These readings, the sub-levels bigger than we thought. Multiple rooms, some kind of automated system activating." Viper paused in his dialing, his expression darkening. "What kind of system?" "Unknown, but it's sophisticated. Military grade, maybe better." Emma's phone vibrated in her pocket. Not a message this time, but a signal. The real security system, the one these men couldn't detect, was fully online. Everything her father had built, every lesson he had taught her about protecting their legacy, was about to be put to the test. "Look at me!" Viper grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "What's down there? What's Daddy been hiding in his basement?" Emma thought of her mother's pendant, now broken in this man's pocket. Thought of all the times her father had warned her that their family's peace was bought with preparation, with the constant readiness to defend what was theirs. "You can still walk away," she said softly, dropping the tremor from her voice for the first time. The change was subtle, but she saw it register in Viper's eyes, a flicker of uncertainty quickly masked by anger. "Breach charges ready," one of the tactical team reported. "On your order." Viper studied Emma's face, perhaps finally sensing that something wasn't quite right about the frightened waitress act. "You know what I think?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I think you're just like your old man, playing games, hiding behind this innocent act." Emma allowed herself a small smile, one that made Viper take a half-step back before he caught himself. "No," she said quietly. "I'm much worse." Her hand moved to her pocket, to the real key she'd carried since her 18th birthday. Father, had to learn everything the hard way. But me? She met Viper's eyes directly, letting him see what she'd been hiding all night. I had the benefit of his experience. The lights in the diner flickered, then stabilized at half brightness. From beneath their feet came a low hum of machinery awakening. "What did you do?" Viper demanded, his composure cracking for the first time. "I gave you a chance to walk away," Emma replied, her voice carrying the same quiet authority her father had used in his Golden Dragon days. "You really should have taken it." The diner's security system came alive with a soft whir, shutters silently descending over the windows as emergency lights cast the room in an eerie blue glow. Through the kitchen window, Emma saw Cook smile for the first time that night, a grim expression that transformed his weathered face from harmless old man to something far more dangerous. "Lock it down!" Viper shouted, but his men's radios only produced static. The tactical team's expensive equipment had gone dark, their tablets displaying nothing but error messages. Emma felt the subtle vibration beneath her feet that meant the sublevel's primary systems were fully online. "What the hell is this?" Viper grabbed her arm again, but his grip betrayed uncertainty. "What kind of game are you playing?" Emma met his eyes calmly, all pretense of timidity gone. "You wanted to know about the Golden Dragon's legacy?" She nodded toward their useless equipment. "You're experiencing it firsthand. Military-grade electronic warfare suite, courtesy of some old friends from Father's days in Shanghai." The tactical team's leader approached, his professional demeanor cracking. "Sir, we're completely dark. Comms, thermals, everything. Whatever's down there, it's broadcasting some kind of interference pattern I've never seen before. You know what your mistake was?" Emma's voice carried clearly through the tension-filled air. "You thought Father went away those years to hide, to learn how to be legitimate." She smiled, the expression carrying none of her earlier fear. "He was learning, all right, learning from the best in the business about how to protect what's his." Viper's hand moved to his weapon, but Emma continued as if she hadn't noticed. "Right. Now your perimeter teams are being systematically isolated. The parking lot surveillance system isn't just watching, it's creating blind spots, herding them exactly where we want them." "She's bluffing," one of the steel wolves growled. But the tactical team's leader wasn't so sure. His eyes darted between his dead equipment and the increasingly confident woman before him. "Am I—" Emma nodded toward the windows, where the shutters had created narrow observation slits. "Count your men outside. Notice how there seem to be fewer than there were 5 minutes ago?" Viper rushed to the nearest window, peering through the slits. The parking lot was strangely still, the tactical team's positions seemingly abandoned. "Where are they?" he demanded, spinning back to face her. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Emma replied calmly. "Father's system is automated. Right now, your men are experiencing what he calls the Ghost Protocol, a combination of targeted EMF pulses and infrasound frequencies designed to disorient and separate hostile forces." The diner's lights flickered again, and Emma felt another vibration through the floor, the second phase initiating. In the kitchen, Cook had moved away from the counter, his stance shifting subtly into something more practiced, more dangerous. "You think some fancy tech is going to save you?" Viper's voice carried an edge of desperation now. "We still have the numbers, the weapons. Your daddy's tricks won't—" "You still don't understand," Emma interrupted, her voice carrying the same quiet authority her father had used in his dealings. "This isn't about saving me. It's about teaching you a lesson about respect, about consequences." The tactical team's leader was the first to realize something was wrong. "The air," he said. "Suddenly it's different." His trained senses had picked up what the others hadn't yet noticed. A subtle change in the atmosphere, a barely perceptible mist beginning to form near the ceiling. "Another of Father's innovations," Emma explained, as if discussing the weather. "A proprietary compound developed by his contacts in Hong Kong. Non-lethal, of course. Father's legitimate now, remember?" But in about 30 seconds, your motor functions will begin to deteriorate. Nothing permanent, just inconvenient. Viper raised his weapon, but his hand was already shaking slightly. You'll be affected too, he snarled, trying to keep her. In his increasingly unsteady sights, Emma reached into her pocket and removed what looked like a small breath mint, popping it into her mouth. Prophylaxis, she explained. Been taking it in small doses for years. Building up immunity is part of the family business. Around the room, the steel wolves and their tactical backup were beginning to stumble, their movements becoming uncoordinated. Behind the counter, Martha calmly pulled on a small mask, the same type Cook now wore in the kitchen. The ghost protocol has 3 phases, Emma continued, watching as Viper struggled to keep his weapon pointed at her. First, isolation, then disorientation, and finally, she smiled as the third vibration rumbled through the floor, submission. The mist was visible now, curling through the air like living smoke. One by one, the intruders began to collapse, their trained reflexes and professional equipment useless against chemistry they couldn't fight, an infrastructure they couldn't breach. Your father, Viper managed, dropping to one knee as his muscles. Betrayed him. He'll pay for this. The people we work for, The people you work for. Emma knelt beside him, her voice gentle but implacable. Should have done better research. Should have remembered why the Golden Dragon was feared before he became James Chen, legitimate businessman. Through the window, slits, she could see similar scenes playing out in the parking lot. The remnants of the tactical team, stumbling, falling, their expensive gear and training meaning nothing against decades of paranoid preparation. When father went away, Emma continued, watching as Viper's eyes struggled to focus on her. He wasn't just learning business, he was making connections with people who specialized in making problems disappear, in teaching lessons that never need to be taught twice. The last of the intruders slumped to the floor, consciousness fleeing despite their best efforts to resist. Emma stood, surveying the scene with professional detachment. Only then did she allow herself to feel the full weight of the night's events, and the price these men would pay for underestimating a waitress in a remote Montana diner. Emma retrieved her mother's broken pendant from Viper's pocket, running her fingers over the jade surface, now marred by a thin crack. Behind her, Cook emerged from the kitchen, his movements carrying the fluid grace of someone far more dangerous than a simple line cook. "Perimeter's clear," he reported, his voice no longer carrying its usual folksy drawl. "Response teams moving in to collect the ones outside. Status of the merchandise?" "Alive," Emma replied, watching as Martha efficiently began zip-tying the unconscious intruders. The compound worked exactly as designed. They'll wake up with horrible headaches and interesting gaps in their memory, but nothing permanent. Her phone buzzed, a message from her father. "Surveillance confirms total containment. Background checks complete on all subjects. We found the connection." Emma's fingers tightened around the broken pendant. Someone had given the steel wolves inside information about the Golden Dragon, about the Midnight Pine's true purpose. Now they would find out who. "You know what happens next," Cook said quietly, his eyes on the tactical team's leader, the most dangerous of their opponents, now helpless on the diner's floor. "Your father's protocols are clear when it comes to breaches of this magnitude." Emma nodded, remembering lessons learned in her father's study, surrounded by books on strategy and ancient wisdom. "The Ghost Protocol isn't just about neutralizing threats," she recited. "It's about ensuring they never resurface." The sub-level's heavy doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a state-of-the-art facility that would have put military installations to shame. Teams of professionals emerged, medical staff to monitor the prisoners, technical experts to gather intelligence from their equipment, and security personnel to begin the cleanup. "Miss Chen," the response team's leader approached, his manner respectful. We've identified the tactical operators, ex-military, working for a private security firm with interesting connections to your father's old competitors. Someone's making a play, Emma mused, watching as the unconscious intruders were carefully transferred to secure transport vehicles. Using the steel wolves as disposable assets, feeding them just enough information to make them dangerous. Martha appeared at her side, the older woman's earlier fear replaced by cool professionalism. The basement's ready. Dr. Liu is standing by with the chemical interrogation suite. Emma held up her hand. No, not the basement. She looked at the broken pendant, thinking of her father's teachings about power and responsibility. Take them to the lake house facility. I want to handle this personally. Cook raised an eyebrow. Your father's protocols. My father taught me to think for myself, Emma interrupted gently. These men were sent here by someone who knows about our past, about the Golden Dragon. I want to know why now, after all these years of peace. Through the window slits, she watched as unmarked vehicles efficiently removed all traces of the night's events. By morning, there would be nothing to suggest anything had happened at the Midnight Pine beyond a routine evening service. What about him? Cook nodded toward Viper, still unconscious but now securely restrained. He's the kind who holds grudges. Emma touched the crack in her mother's pendant, feeling the sharp edge where smooth jade had been broken. By the time we're done, he won't remember enough to hold a grudge, but he'll wake up every time he sees a diner with an instinctive urge to walk the other way. Her phone buzzed again, another message from her father. Liu confirms chemical interrogation suite ready at Lake House. But daughter, remember, mercy without justice teaches nothing. Justice without mercy creates enemies. Martha, Emma turned to the older woman. Call Manager Liu at the Valley Branch. Tell him we need a full cleanup crew here before dawn. I want the diner ready for breakfast service as usual. Already done, Martha smiled. The early regulars never need to know their favorite waitress does anything more interesting than pour. And coffee. Emma surveyed the scene one last time, the unconscious intruders being efficiently removed, the tactical gear being catalogued and contained, the diner slowly returning to its harmless appearance. These men had come looking for the Golden Dragon's vault, never suspecting that the real treasure wasn't gold or secrets, but knowledge. The knowledge of how to build something legitimate from shadows, how to protect it once built, and how to ensure it stayed protected. Your father would be proud, Cook said quietly, watching as she directed the cleanup with the same quiet authority she used to manage the breakfast rush. You handled it exactly as he would have. Emma shook her head, her fingers closing around. The broken pendant. No, father would have made an example of them, something public, something that would echo through their underworld for years. She watched as the last of the prisoners was loaded for transport, but I learned something he didn't. Sometimes the quietest lessons are the ones that last longest. The first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the Montana sky. Soon the early morning truckers would arrive, looking for coffee and conversation. They would find Emma Chen, the quiet waitress who knew their orders by heart, who listened to their stories with gentle attention, who seemed to want nothing more from life than to serve good food in a peaceful place. They would never know that. Beneath their feet lay a command center worthy of a military installation, or that the shy girl who refilled their coffee cups had just orchestrated the systematic dismantling of a criminal organization. They wouldn't see the steel beneath her smile, or understand that her apparent submission was merely a different form of strength. And that, Emma reflected as she pocketed her mother's broken pendant, was exactly as it should be. The best power was the kind that never needed to be displayed, and the most dangerous predator was the one that could pass for prey. The lake house facility rose from the Montana wilderness like a luxury resort, its elegant architecture concealing state-of-the-art security measures and subterranean levels that never appeared on any official blueprints. Emma stood in the observation room, watching through one-way glass as Dr. Liu prepared Viper for questioning. "First round of chemical interrogation complete," Dr. Liu reported through the intercom, her precise movements reflecting years of experience in extracting information from unwilling subjects. Subjects' resistance to standard protocols suggests prior exposure to counter-interrogation techniques. Emma touched the newly repaired pendant at her throat. Her father's personal jeweler had worked through the night to restore it. "Show me what you found in his preliminary screening." The wall of monitors displayed a complex web of connections, financial transactions, and surveillance photos. The Steel Wolves had been receiving funding and intelligence from multiple sources, all carefully routed through offshore accounts and shell companies. "Pattern recognition suggests professional backing," the analyst beside her noted, highlighting several transactions. Someone with significant resources was grooming them for this operation. Through the glass, Emma watched as Viper struggled. Against his restraints, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine fear as Dr. Liu prepared another compound. The man who had thought to threaten a simple waitress now found himself facing the full resources of an organization he hadn't known existed. "Mr. Chen's initial analysis was correct," Dr. Liu's voice came through the speakers. "The subject's blood work shows traces of specialized countermeasures. Someone prepared them for potential chemical interrogation." Emma's phone buzzed with a message from her father. "Singapore connection confirmed. Old enemies moving pieces again. Be careful, daughter. Some ghosts don't stay buried." "Talk to me about their tactical team," Emma addressed the security chief, who had just entered. "Those weren't ordinary contractors." "Ex-military, but with interesting gaps in their service records," he replied, bringing up personnel files on the main screen. "Several served in classified operations in Southeast Asia, the kind of operations that overlapped with your father's previous business interests." Emma studied the faces on the screen, noting the professional training that had proved useless against her father's preparations. "They knew about the Ghost Protocol," she mused. "Not the details, but they knew we had sophisticated countermeasures. Someone told them what to expect." Through the glass, Viper's resistance was finally cracking under Dr. Liu's expertise. The chemical cocktail flowing through his veins was designed not just to lower inhibitions, but to create specific memory gaps. When he finally left this place, the details of the Midnight Pines defenses would be lost in a haze of confused impressions. "Miss Chen," the analyst called her attention to a new pattern emerging in the data. "We're seeing references to something called Project Eclipse in their communications, multiple mentions over the past 3 months, always in relation to your father's properties." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Eclipse had been her father's code name during his darkest days, when the Golden Dragon was more than just a legend whispered in fearful tones. Someone was deliberately invoking those memories, trying to draw connections between past and present. "Dr. Liu," she spoke into the intercom, "focus his questioning on Project Eclipse. I want to know who's using that name and why." The doctor nodded, adjusting her approach with practiced skill. On the monitors, Viper's vital signs fluctuated as the compounds took fuller effect. They told us," his voice was slurred, resistant, "said the old man was sitting on something big, something from before, called it insurance." Emma's fingers tightened around her pendant. Her father had many insurance policies from his previous life. Documents, recordings, evidence of crimes that could topple empires, but those were scattered across secure locations worldwide, protected by layers of security and misdirection. "The Steel Wolves were just the first wave," the security chief noted, highlighting patterns in their surveillance data. These equipment requisitions, these personnel movements, they're preparing for something bigger. Through the glass, Viper had begun revealing names, locations, contacts, a web of conspiracy that stretched from Montana to Singapore. Emma listened with growing concern as a pattern emerged. Someone was systematically probing her father's operations, testing defenses, looking for weaknesses. "Your father's protocols suggest immediate elimination of all subjects," Dr. Liu reminded her through the intercom. Standard procedure for breaches of this magnitude, but Emma was already seeing a different possibility. These men, properly handled, could become assets rather than liabilities. Their memories of this night would be chemically altered, but the fear, the bone-deep understanding that some powers were best left undisturbed, would remain. "Adjust the compound," she instructed Dr. Liu. "I want them functional but redirected. When they leave here, they should remember only that they investigated a potential target and found it completely legitimate. Any attempt to look deeper should trigger intense anxiety." The doctor raised an eyebrow but complied. She had served the Chen family long enough to trust their judgment, even when it deviated from established protocols. "And Viper?" the security chief asked, watching as the gang leader's resistance finally crumbled completely under the chemicals. Emma thought of her mother's pendant, now restored, but forever carrying that hidden crack, a reminder that some damages change things permanently. "Give him a special dose," she decided. "When he sees a diner, any diner, I want him to feel an overwhelming urge to be elsewhere. Let him carry that gift for the rest of his life." Her phone buzzed with another message from her father. "Daughter, Liu reports you're deviating from standard elimination protocols. Remember what I taught you about loose ends?" Emma smiled, watching as Dr. Liu expertly began the process of rebuilding Viper's memories into something more useful. "Some ends," she typed back, "are better tied than cut. These men will carry our message more effectively alive than dead." The monitors showed dawn approaching outside, the Montana wilderness awakening to another peaceful day. Soon, the Midnight Pine would open for breakfast service, its dangers once again hidden behind coffee pots and menus. And Emma Chen would return to her role as the quiet waitress, carrying within her the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best victories were the ones the world never knew about. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the Steel Wolves' failed incursion. Emma moved through the Midnight Pine's morning rush with practiced ease, refilling coffee cups and taking orders as if nothing had ever disturbed the diner's peaceful routine. But her trained eyes noticed the subtle changes. How Viper's tactical team, released back into the world with carefully modified memories, had spread ripples of unease through certain circles. "Your usual Mr. Harrison?" she asked one of her regulars, a long-haul trucker who had no idea that his favorite waitress had spent the previous night reviewing intelligence reports from Singapore. The old man smiled, completely unaware that the gentle hands pouring his coffee had recently orchestrated the systematic dismantling of a criminal enterprise. "You heard about them Steel Wolves?" another trucker mentioned between bites of pancake. "Whole crew just up and left town. Word is they took one look at some potential targets and decided Montana wasn't worth the trouble." Emma hid her smile behind her order pad. The chemical reprogramming had worked perfectly. Dr. Liu's compounds, ensuring that any thought of the Midnight Pine or its owner now triggered an instinctive aversion in the gang's collective psyche. They had become unwitting ambassadors, their fear spreading through criminal networks like a virus. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. Singapore connection deeper than suspected. Old partners asking questions about Eclipse. Time to accelerate contingency plans. Through the diner's windows, Emma watched as a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot. The vehicle's diplomatic plates and subtle armoring wouldn't mean anything to most observers, but she recognized the signature of certain agencies that existed in the shadows between official organizations. "Martha," she called softly to the older waitress, "take over Section 2 for a bit. I need to handle something in the office." The man who entered wore his government credentials like a well-tailored suit, but Emma recognized the predator's awareness. In his movements, Agent Phillips, if that was his real name, had been one of her father's occasional allies during the transition years when the Golden Dragon was becoming James Chen, legitimate businessman. "Miss Chen," he nodded as she led him to a quiet booth. "Or should I say, Miss Matthews? I believe that's the name on your work permit." Emma poured coffee with the same care she had used when dismantling the Steel Wolves operation. "Just Emma." "Is fine, Agent Phillips. I assume this isn't a social call? Your recent visitors," he selected his words carefully, "they had interesting connections. Connections that have certain people in Washington asking questions about Project Eclipse." Emma's fingers brushed her repaired pendant, thinking of old files and buried secrets. "Eclipse was before my time," she replied softly. "Father's insurance policy from the old days." Phillips leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Someone's trying to force your father's hand. The Steel Wolves were just testing the waters. Our sources indicate a larger operation is being planned. Professional wetwork teams, corporate mercenaries." Through the kitchen window, Emma saw Cook watching their interaction, his hand casually near the counter where certain tools were. "Always ready. They think Father still has the original Eclipse files," she mused, "the ones that could topple governments." "Do you?" Phillips asked, his tone carefully neutral. Emma smiled, the same gentle expression she used when serving pie to truckers. "Agent Phillips, if those files existed, do you really think I'd keep them in a diner basement?" He chuckled, but his eyes remained serious. "Emma, this is bigger than some local gang trying to muscle in on territory. The people behind this, they're connected to your father's old operations in Singapore. They remember the Golden Dragon, and they're not afraid of ghosts." "They should be," Emma replied softly, thinking of hidden rooms and chemical compounds, of lessons learned in the dark, and protocols designed by paranoid minds. "Father didn't just teach me how to run a business, Agent Phillips. He taught me how to protect one." Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her father. "Phillips making his move? Remember, daughter, sometimes the best defense is letting them think they've found what they're looking for. We could offer protection," Phillips suggested, though they both knew it wasn't really an offer. "Officially, bring the Midnight Pine under certain agencies' oversight." Emma thought of the Lake House facility, of Dr. Liu's laboratories and the secrets they contained, of all the other properties in her father's network, each with its own hidden protocols and buried surprises. "That's very kind," she smiled, rising, to refill an elderly couple's coffee cups before returning to their booth. "But I learned from Father that the best protection is the kind no one knows you have." Phillips watched her move through the diner, noting how her apparent vulnerability masked perfect situational awareness. "They won't stop," he warned as she returned. "The people behind the Steel Wolves, they're not used to failure." "Neither am I," Emma replied simply. Through the windows, she saw another vehicle pulling into the lot, this one bearing the subtle markers of Singapore private security. "In fact, Agent Phillips, I believe some of them are about to learn a valuable lesson about underestimating quiet waitresses in remote diners." Phillips followed her gaze, his expression changing as he recognized the implications. "You knew they were coming." "Father taught me to always think 3 moves ahead," Emma confirmed, watching as heavily built men in expensive suits entered the diner. "The Steel Wolves were just pawns. Tonight we deal with one of the players." Her phone lit up with a final message from her father. "Remember, daughter, sometimes the most effective power is the kind they never see coming." Emma touched her pendant, thinking of hidden rooms and modified memories. of chemical compounds and carefully orchestrated fears. These men had come looking for the Golden Dragon's legacy. They were about to discover that some legends didn't die. They evolved. The Midnight Pines evening shift was winding down, rain drumming steadily against the windows as Emma methodically prepared for what was to come. The Singapore team had spent the day conducting what they thought was subtle surveillance, unaware that every move they made was being documented, analyzed, and fed into protocols designed long before they'd ever heard of Montana. "More coffee, sir?" she asked their leader, a man who introduced himself as Mr. Wei, but whose real identity she had confirmed hours ago through her father's networks. Former Malaysian Special Forces, now working for one of Singapore's more ambitious criminal enterprises. "You're very attentive," Wei smiled, his charm carrying an edge of predatory intent. "It must be quiet, working in a place like this. Peaceful." Emma ducked her head in apparent shyness, noting how his men had positioned themselves throughout the diner, one by the door, one near the kitchen, two others boxing her into the corner. Professional work, but they had made the same mistake as the Steel Wolves, assuming the Midnight Pine was just another remote truck stop. Her phone vibrated with a message from her father. "Wei's presence confirms our suspicions. Singapore faction making direct play for Eclipse files. Ghost protocol authorized at your discretion." "It is peaceful," Emma agreed softly, watching Wei's reflection in the chrome coffee maker. "Father always said that's what he wanted for me, a simple life, away from complications." Wei's smile widened fractionally. "Ah, so you do know your father. The Steel Wolves seem to think you were just another employee." "The Steel Wolves?" Emma kept her voice carefully tremulous. "They weren't very nice people." "No," Wei agreed, his tone carrying false sympathy. "But then, nice people rarely survive long in certain businesses. Your father understood that once, back when he was known by other names." Through the kitchen window, Emma saw Cook watching the interaction, his hands moving with practiced casualness as he prepared for what they both knew was coming. Martha had already made her excuses and left early. Protocol for situations involving higher-level threats. "I don't know anything about that," Emma demurred, but Wei's hand shot out, catching her wrist. Unlike Viper's crude grip, his touch was almost gentle, which made it all the more threatening. "Miss Chen," his voice dropped to a near whisper, "we both know that's not true. Your father's recent activities suggest he's preparing to move certain assets that my employers have a vested interest in." Emma let her hand tremble slightly in his grip. "I just run the diner," she insisted. "Father keeps me away from his business dealings." "The Golden Dragon's daughter," Wei mused, "reduced to serving coffee to truckers. It would be tragic if I believed it for a moment." His grip tightened fractionally. "The Eclipse files, Miss Chen. Where are they?" Emma's free hand moved to her. A pendant, a gesture that didn't escape Wei's notice. "You're hurting me," she whispered, watching his men shift positions in response to her apparent distress. "Not yet," Wei replied softly. "But I will if necessary. Your father's insurance policy has outlived its usefulness. Times change, alliances shift. The old guards are being replaced by new powers who don't fear ancient legends." Through the windows, Emma saw more vehicles arriving, unmarked SUVs carrying Wei's backup teams. They were being more cautious than the Steel Wolves, bringing enough force to handle any conventional security measures. "Please," Emma's voice cracked perfectly. "There's a safe in the basement. Father. He made me memorize the combination, but I've never used it. Never wanted to know what was inside." Wei studied her face, looking for deception. "Your father's protocols are well known, Miss Chen. Any direct attempt to access his vaults triggers automated responses. Unless," his smile turned cruel, "unless his own daughter provides proper authorization." Emma's phone buzzed again. "Daughter, Wei's teams are deploying electronic countermeasures. They're prepared for the Ghost Protocol. Time to show them why I spent those years teaching you things a waitress never needs to know. The safe, Emma whispered, letting real tears fill her eyes. I'll show you, just don't hurt anyone. Wei released her wrist, gesturing for his men to maintain their positions. After you, Miss Chen. But remember, my men are professionals. Any attempt at deception will be poorly received. Emma led him toward the back hallway, noting how his men moved to cover potential angles of attack. They were good, she had to admit. Professional, thorough, prepared for conventional security responses. What they weren't prepared for was a daughter who had spent her life learning from one of the most paranoid minds in modern criminal history. The access panel, she gestured, to what appeared to be a simple keypad near the storage room door. It requires both code and biometric authentication. Wei nodded to one of his men, who approached with sophisticated scanning equipment. No tricks, Miss Chen. We've studied your father's systems extensively. Emma allowed herself a small smile as she entered the first code sequence. Above them, hidden speakers began emitting a frequency just below human perception. The first phase of a protocol very different from the one used against the steel. Wolves? Interesting. Wei's tech specialist frowned at his equipment. The system's security architecture, it's not matching our intelligence. Father believes in redundancy, Emma explained, touching her pendant as she entered the second sequence. In having backup plans for his backup plans. The lights flickered briefly as hidden machinery hummed to life. Wei's men shifted uneasily, their professional training warning them that something wasn't quite right. Sir, the tech specialist's voice carried an edge of concern. These readings, they're not standard security protocols. The system's doing something else. Wei's hand moved to his concealed weapon, but Emma was already entering the final sequence. You were right about one thing, Mr. Wei, she said softly, all pretense of fear gone from her voice. Times do change, legends evolve. The hallway's lights shifted to a deep red as Emma stepped through the storage room door, leaving Wei and his men to discover exactly why her father had spent years teaching his daughter things a simple waitress would never need to know. Some lessons, after all, could only be learned the hard way. The storage room transformed before Wei's eyes, panels sliding away to reveal a command center that would have impressed military contractors. But unlike the Steel Wolves encounter, this wasn't just about advanced security systems and chemical deterrence. This was about showing certain people in Singapore why the Golden Dragon's reputation had endured for so long. Impressive setup, Wei admitted, his professional calm masking growing uncertainty as his equipment continued to malfunction. But we came prepared for your father's tricks, Miss Chen. The Ghost Protocol won't work on us. The Ghost Protocol? Emma smiled, taking her position behind a sophisticated control station. That was designed for common thugs and street gangs. For professionals like you, Father designed something special. Her fingers danced across hidden panels, activating systems that had been waiting years for this moment. Tell me, Mr. Wei, do you know why they really called him the Golden Dragon? Through the reinforced windows, she watched his men deploy countermeasures. Signal jammers, EMP devices, cutting-edge equipment designed to neutralize electronic security systems. Their preparation would have been impressive if they had been facing the threats they expected. Because he was ruthless, Wei replied, his hand still on his weapon. Because he understood that power comes from fear. No. Emma's voice carried the same gentle tone she used with difficult customers. Because he knew that true power isn't about what you can do to others. It's about what you can make them do to themselves. The room's lighting shifted again, taking on an otherworldly quality that made shadows dance oddly. Wei's men shifted uneasily as their equipment began displaying impossible readings. Sir, the tech specialist's voice cracked slightly, These energy signatures, they're not like anything in our briefings. The whole building's resonating at frequencies that shouldn't be possible. Emma thought of her father's lessons, of years spent learning not just about security systems and chemical compounds, but about the psychology of fear itself. "Your employers in Singapore," she said softly. "They remember the Golden Dragon as he was 20 years ago. They think they've evolved beyond what he represented." Through hidden cameras, she watched as Wei's backup teams outside began experiencing the first effects, subtle at first, then increasingly disorienting. The compound being pumped through the ventilation system wasn't designed to incapacitate, like the one used on the Steel Wolves. This was about something far more sophisticated. "What are you doing?" Wei demanded, his composure cracking as his men began showing signs of distress. The shadows in the corners seemed to move independently now, creating patterns that played havoc with trained minds. "Teaching a lesson," Emma replied calmly, initiating the next phase. "About respect. About understanding that some powers are best left undisturbed." She touched her pendant, thinking of all the times her father had taught her that the most effective weapon wasn't violence, but suggestion. The tech specialist's equipment sparked and died, but not from any EMP or conventional countermeasure. The systems Emma had activated operated on principles that Wei's employers had never encountered. Technology developed in secret laboratories, refined through years of careful testing. "Your men are currently experiencing something unique," she explained, as if discussing the diner's daily specials. "A combination of chemical compounds and targeted electromagnetic frequencies designed to create very specific psychological effects. Nothing permanently damaging, of course. Father is legitimate now, remember?" Wei raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking now, his trained reflexes fighting against inputs his brain couldn't process. The shadows seemed to writhe, taking shapes that triggered primal fears buried deep in the human psyche. "Impossible," he whispered, watching as his elite teams outside began to break formation, their professional discipline crumbling against forces they couldn't fight. "These effects, the technology doesn't exist." Father spent those years learning from more than just businessmen. Emma's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. There were scientists, researchers, people working on the edges of known science, all funded by what you so desperately want to find, the Eclipse files. Through the command center's windows, they watched as Wei's men began to turn on each other, their minds creating threats from shadows and enemies from empty air. The compound flowing through their systems wasn't toxic or lethal. It simply made them extraordinarily susceptible to suggestion. "Stop this," Wei's command carried. Less authority now, his own mind beginning to doubt what his eyes were telling him. "Whatever game you're playing, this isn't a game, Mr. Wei." Emma's voice had lost all its waitress timidity. "This is a message. To your employers, to everyone who thinks the Golden Dragon's legacy is just about hidden files and old secrets." She initiated the final sequence, watching as the most sophisticated psychological warfare system ever developed began its work. "When you wake up," she continued as Wei and his men began to succumb to effects they couldn't comprehend, "you'll remember only what we want you to remember. About power that shouldn't be challenged, about respect that must be maintained." The last thing Wei saw before consciousness fled was Emma Chen, the quiet waitress from a remote Montana diner, standing amid technology that shouldn't exist, wielding power that defied explanation. And in that moment, he understood why the Golden Dragon's reputation had endured for so long. Some lessons, it seemed, had to be taught by the next generation. Hours later, as dawn painted the Montana sky in shades of promise, Emma served coffee to her regular customers, as if nothing had ever disturbed the Midnight Pines' peaceful routine. Wei and his men had been returned to their hotels. their minds carrying carefully crafted memories that would spread ripples of unease through certain circles in Singapore. Her phone buzzed one final time, a message from her father. "Well done, daughter. Some ghosts should never rest. Some legends need new chapters." Emma touched her pendant, thinking of hidden rooms and modified memories, of lessons learned and legacies protected. These men had come looking for the Golden Dragon's secrets. Never. Understanding that the real power wasn't in hidden files or buried evidence. It was in a daughter who had learned that true strength often wore a waitress's smile, and that some consequences were best served with coffee and quiet understanding. The Midnight Pines sign glowed steadily in the early morning light, welcoming truckers and travelers to a simple diner where a not-so-simple waitress continued her father's work of teaching respect, one lesson at a time. Some stories, after all, were best told in whispers and shadows, in memories that haunted and lessons that lingered long after the coffee had gone cold. Stay tuned, stay alert, and most importantly, stay subscribed.